Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 5 of the Stand Up for Grain Safety Week. I just can't believe how fast this week has gone. And thank you for everybody who has joined us every day to put a focus on your safety and your safety around grain and grain structures and those jobs or those tasks that we do in agriculture every day. We've had some very unique sessions. People may not think ergonomics that we had on Wednesday has anything to do with grain safety, but it's all about the people. That's an important focus for us. And I hope you all remember that it's about our people and wanting to keep them safe. So I am Barb Grove. I am the Quality Systems Manager with Central Valley Ag, and I am a past president of Jeeps and a co-founder of the Stand Up for Grain Safety Week. Today's event or today's topic is about effective safety training. If people can't understand it, people don't buy into it, then really are they going to be working safe? So our presenter today is going to talk to you about how do you make sure people are engaged in our training. Some things to expect. I think Catherine put in the chat already. If you have any technical issues, you can't hear the video is buffering, first take a look at your own settings. We all know in this day and age, using our Zoom and Teams all the time, that if we have a lot of things up in the background, a lot of things running, we could just be buffering from our side. Hey, we're getting a lot of rain through the Midwest today, a lot of storms. That tends to affect it too. So check yours. And if you are still having problems, direct message Salah Isa. He'll put a little hello out there in the chat so you have his name. And if you get kicked off and can't get logged back in for some reason, email grainsafety2010@gmail.com. Again, that's out there in the chat box for you. Some things for us, we do want to stay engaged. We want everybody today to get involved, make comments, take polls, watch what's going on in the chat. So we want you to have that ability. And I'm going to have Salah put up some slides here again for us because our learning sessions wouldn't be possible without a great group of sponsors. It's brought to you today by the Alliance, which is an OSHA cooperative program, the University of Illinois, the Grain Handling Safety Council, and the Grain Elevator and Processing Society. But it also wouldn't be possible without a great group of sponsors that donate their time to do these trainings, to give you free trainings. And our sponsors this year are ADM, Bartlett Grain Company, Central State Center for Agriculture Safety and Health, or CS-CASH, Central Valley Ag, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, or Jeeps, Grain and Feed Association of Illinois, the Grain Journal, Kansas State University, University of Illinois, University of Nebraska Medical Center, the Lamar Advertising Company, and National Grain and Feed Association. Hey, so get active in that chat or get active with your reactions, and let's say thank you for all those people that again so graciously give to make this event happen. And we also want to make sure, since this week is dedicated to safety, we want to remind everybody of our rights and our responsibilities. Employers are required to provide a safe and healthy workplace free of known hazards, and even if they are not subject to OSHA enforcement. And employees have a right to a safe and healthy workplace free of hazards and to be able to report concerns without fear and retaliation. All right, so we want to know Who do we have watching? Let's get active out in that chat box and tell us, where are you viewing from? Where do you come from today? We've had just great responses this week, people from all over the country and from other countries, and that's very exciting to see. Again, to know people are taking advantage of free trainings, and we feel we are reaching people that need it. We are also going to put up a short poll. We know that a lot of times people get together with their teams for training. So we'd like to know, as this poll pops up, how many people are viewing with you? And we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that poll. Ooh, I see out there Sergey from Ukraine. Thank you. You have been an engaged person all week. Glad to see you here again today. San Diego, Illinois, Montana. Thank you all for attending. So while you guys are finishing up this poll and telling us where you're from, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Before that, a quick reminder, we will be supplying a certificate for today's event that'll get put out there in the chat near the end of it today for you to download. And you can also get a certificate for the overall Stand Up for Grain Safety event, and that will be out on the standupforgrainsafety.org website. And it is recognize your participation. And in that, aside from the certificate that it'll download for you, it'll ask you a few questions. What did your group do? As this week, what kind of focus did you do? And again, what kind of things would you like to see us present? What do you want to know? So without further ado, I'm going to get back to our speaker, and I want to introduce to you Carlos Gallegos. Carlos currently serves as the chief for the Occupational Safety Training Branch of the OSHA Training Institute in Arlington Heights, Illinois. He provides high impact safety training for employees at OSHA Federal, OSHA state plans, and the state consultation programs. So Carlos started his safety career in the U.S. Air Force. Thank you, Carlos, for serving and bringing your knowledge to us. So if you would like to go ahead and share your screen.
Right.
All right, and you are ready to go.
All right. Thank you, Barb, for the nice introduction. Thanks a lot for setting all this up and getting us going this morning. I've been working for OSHA since 2000. I've investigated several grain injuries, at least one fatality in grain. I worked in Western Illinois, so special shout out to the Illinois Grain and Feed Association for always partnering with us and helping us get our folks trained. Currently, I work at the OSHA Training Institute, but before that, I did a lot of enforcement type work. I worked in our regional office doing legal reviews of cases, and I went back to the field because I wanted to learn more about ag, and I got this position out in Western Illinois. So we handled everything from the edge of the metro area in DuPage County all the way to the Mississippi River. So in there, we had a ton of grain handling operations, and I managed our part of our local emphasis program on grain handling operations. So we had sites that we generated lists for and targeted, and then we had response work to go out on when we had complaints or injuries. So that's a little bit of my background. I've been working at the Training Institute now for 7 years, and basically managing the training that our folks get out in the field. I take part in a lot of that training. I'm actually in Boston right now doing a power line course for the Mass Transit Authority and for the Mass Consultation and Enforcement folks. So thanks for having me. I'm glad to get so many participants here, and hopefully this topic serves you all well. Just to introduce this, we're going to go through 5 steps and 5 different approaches that we can use to build more trust, communication, and strengthen our performance when we're doing safety training or when we're just bringing people on board or teaching them some kind of new task where there's safety considerations to be taken into account. So we'll just call these lessons for the sake of not saying learning objectives too often. So several lessons here we're going to go over. We'll talk about building trust and rapport among diverse work groups. Primarily in the United States, we have a lot of folks from Latin America. That would be either North America, Mexico, Central America, going through all those countries, and then South America. We have 27 Spanish-speaking nations in the world, and most of them are attached to the United States. And we get migrant workforces from all over the place, particularly in grain and feed operations. We're going to be seeing plenty of Latino workers. I myself am Latino, so I've had that experience. So I'll be speaking from that end of the spectrum. But diverse workforce groups and underserved groups also include a lot of the folks that you may have grown up with in your communities. So it's not always folks from another country. Sometimes it's people who've been underserved and undereducated, didn't finish school. Some folks don't have even a high school diploma and they're seeking employment. So a lot of our general ways of doing things or what we'd expect as not being in underserved groups doesn't work for other people. So we always have to consider what else we can do. And number one is building trust and making people feel like they're part of the group, regardless of what walk of life they came from. So in that, we're going to use good questioning techniques. We're going to make sure that when we talk to people, it's useful to them, and the back and forth and the conversation that arises out of that is respectful and useful to them. And a lot of that is going to be taking into account their cultures, where people came from, whether it's just different from where you came from, in a minor way or in a large way. So consider that everyone has their own cultural influences that brought them to the workplace, and everybody goes home to a different environment than we go to. So in all that, we're going to make sure that we empathize, that we understand at least where folks are coming from. So that's where we'll talk about empathy in our safety conversations. And then we're going to practice active listening. So making sure that we're hearing people, not just listening to people. So we'll talk about the differences there and how that's going to help us reduce hazards. So why does rapport matter so much? Why are why are we having trouble building trust among workers to where they feel like talking to us on a daily basis and letting us know if there's near misses or if there's any kind of concerns that they might have for their own safety and health? So in that, we want to talk about establishing rapport to get over some of these hurdles. So we all know that grain handling can be a high hazard industry for a lot of the workers who are doing hazardous work. For a lot of others, it's more directing and managing that workforce. So we always want workers to be able to bring up safety concerns. So they have to feel safe to speak up. And a lot of times in underserved communities, there's a high level of respect that folks have for their employers or people who represent their employers, specifically managers. A lot of previous experiences may have led them to fear retaliation or just not feel like they can speak up when they feel like they're exposed to a hazard. Some people feel like that's why they're there, to do the dirty work, to get in harm's way, and they're willing to do that to hold on to that position. So building rapport among those groups is very important, and getting them to participate in any kind of safety and health activities you have, I'm sure has presented a challenge. So building trust is going to be very important. We're going to have to be visible in the workplace even before folks get into the safety training program or pattern of work. It's good to introduce them to folks who will be providing them training first off, day one. not just because they're giving training, but because they want to get to know them, because you're the safety expert on site. I imagine most of you are in some sort of safety role or have some sort of duties that include safety, either investigating incidents or providing training. So I'll talk about it from both uh, both perspectives. So being visible, knowing people, getting their names down. Um, a lot of Latinos, we have long names. We might have 3 or 4 names, and you want to pick which one is best. And sometimes it's none of the ones written down. Sometimes it's just a nickname, but everybody likes to hear their name. So getting down people's names, what they prefer to be called, not trying to pronounce some long name that's difficult. A lot of us do have longer names. I got lucky. I got one that people can say in English pretty easily. But I'm sure you've ran into folks that you're like, how do you say this name? You don't want to insult people, but sometimes they have a nickname, and sometimes just learning how to say their actual name isn't good enough. You want that nickname. There's a lot of Josephs in the world. Most people like to be called Joe. Um, if people want to call you Joseph your whole life, it sounds too formal. So it doesn't build that trust. It doesn't build that rapport. So that's prime, basically prime objective is, get comfortable with people, get to know them. And then, once you are, getting involved with providing safety training or being that person who walks around, um, there's something called follow through. And in the realm of safety, it's very important to help build trust, to follow through on any kind of commitments that you've made during training. And not so much quickly, but it's just kind of the way you do business. Your training, your commitments have to show beyond what you're just saying. So, basically doing as I do, not as I say, or doing as I say, not as I do. We got to get those straight and make sure that folks see you walking the walk and talking the talk at the same time. And you're the visible person who's doing the safety work. So when you're conducting walkthroughs, it's great to just talk to folks informally, before and after training. Make sure that they're getting it. Make sure that they're able to ask questions. That you guys know each other. And prime prime way to do that is to get some kind of informal leadership established among the workforce. Everybody has their informal leaders among groups. When you talk about underserved groups, there's definitely folks who have either been doing the work longer or they're the elder people in the group. And next thing you know, everybody's going to them informally and giving them some sort of perspective rather than bringing it to you as the safety rep. So it's good to invite those kind of people who you see being the informal leaders, whether they're senior family members to some of your workers, or whether you just see them being the go-to person. They might be the bilingual one who can speak to you the best. So those are great folks to invite into safety training, to invite into being part of maybe the translation that might need to be done from time to time, and getting them involved with real discussions that you're having about safety, so that they can disseminate that to all the other workers and let them know about your commitment and let them know how you're following through on things. It's just an involvement type piece where you're making a representative out of them that's that you're kind of officializing and saying, yeah, you're part of the group and we want you to go out and talk to the workers and and help us disseminate what we're trying to do here. And essentially building rapport is important to this step of things. Um, Whenever we're doing meetings, it's great to use everybody's nicknames that and be friendly to people. Make sure that when you are asking questions, that it's something that's simple, that's friendly, because we want to do better training. So we want input. It's not so much that um, you know everybody has all the answers, but when you're talking to people, you kind of start seeing the problems that are out there, or the lack of understanding that's out there. So encouraging people to talk to each other, making informal leaders, official leaders, and part of the safety commitment at the site is just going to get more of this peer-to-peer feedback happening. and you're going to find out what's safer to do, what's easier to do, what they understand to do, and from there you can find your hazards or your misunderstandings as well. But building rapport, something that my friends here at Jeeps reminded me of is this Dale Carnegie quote. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in our language. Getting on to step 2 of the lesson here. We'll talk more here about how we talk to folks, how we get questions out. So making sure our question styles match what kind of culture we're trying to build at the workplace. And in that, we'll talk about open-ended questions, close-ended, probing, and reflective questions. We'll talk about getting full worker participation, how do we encourage that, and confirming understanding without judgment. So finding a way to ensure that people understand what to do with our safety training, or just with our, typical, job training or on-the-job training. So types of questions we were talking about, those, the open-ended. Have all you heard about open-ended questions? Is this new to anybody? You can raise hands or, hit buttons so I can, see that you know what I'm talking about here. But on the open-ended question side, it's more about, getting someone to tell you a story. It's not so much about getting a yes or no answer. So we want to make sure that we can later on repeat back to them what they've told us and make sure that we're, kind of dispelling any misunderstandings they might have. So what concerns do you have for, when you do grain bin entries? Is a nice way to, get them to talk about different things that, might might rattle them, or that they might be concerned about whenever they're, taking certain steps. And this is just an example, but you would get more than a yes or no answer here. So anytime you're getting more than a yes or no answer, you're allowing for people to really, talk about their thinking and discuss it with you. And that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to get more of a sentence out of people, more of a story out of people, and asking yes or no type questions might be simple because we have language barriers and whatnot. But to get past that, already we've involved somebody who can maybe translate for us, who can give us a hand in, talking to other workers, and that peer-to-peer stuff is going to start coming through more. And every now and then we can get in and, ask a question that might need to be translated out to folks. And when we're asking for thought, when we're asking for a longer answer, it tends to help even strengthen that rapport that you already have. So, you ask things like, how confident are you on doing things? What challenges are you seeing in doing things? And from there, you get a lot more, feedback than asking a closed-ended question like, did you test the atmosphere before you went in? Did you test air quality, or, however you want to say that? You're just going to get a yes or a no. And, it's not going to get into all these issues that we were talking about in open-ended question. So, do you understand? Can you walk me through the steps? Is better than do you understand? So, walking someone through steps, requires them to show you and confirm some kind of understanding that they might have. And if you get certain types of good answers where people are giving you sentence form answers, you're going to want to, reflect on that. And, let's say, for example, it was something someone did where, they didn't perform properly, they explained to you why. And maybe from that discussion, or from them actually speaking to you about it rather than yes or no questions, you can reflect back with them and say, okay, so you felt rushed, maybe next time you need more help. Is that what you're telling me? And, that's more or less to, get them to continue talking and get on to the next topic. So you want to build confidence.
Carlos, I'm stepping in here quick.
Mhm.
You do have just a little bit of background noise, maybe. So are you able to speak just a little bit louder? I think that will
Okay,
stop that.
let me close the door here. Sorry about that. our group go on break there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sorry about that, everyone. So, like I was saying, I want to build competency and not just do training. So here we're seeing an employee actually, walking through some things, maybe a supervisor or a trainer working with them, and they're actually getting to put hands on things. So teaching back really helps you confirm that people understood what you put out there, or now watching them and go do a task that that the training was about, kind of like bin entries. If you're a safety rep out there, and you're dealing with some of the most hazardous portions of the work, you know about grain bin entry, and the hazards posed there, and the many fatalities we've had in grain bins. So before someone starts doing that type of work, or while they're taking their first steps into it, it's great to go out and confirm that, hey, you just got trained and we went over all these techniques. Now we want you to kind of talk us through it, show us that you know what you're doing, demonstrate it, or ask about it while you're starting to do it, or explain it as you do it. That way we know you got the idea. And hey, if we got to go through a translator, then we go through a translator. But and we're not going to have to do this probably again, because we're building competency in you, rather than giving you training and waiting for near misses and things like that to respond, and do like a close-ended type of response where we're just dealing with one issue at a time over and over. It's going to take a whole lot more time to do that than to just take the time to confirm that people get it coming out of training. So that's just one of those great steps, I think, of building competency in people. There's a lot of learning challenges that people have. If they have learning disabilities of some kind, sometimes they have an auditory issue. They can't learn from you just talking to them. Sometimes, they're not a visual learner, and they're not going to learn from watching a video. But across the board, it's understood that people understand best when they practice what they've learned. And when they get an opportunity to put their hands on something and actually interact. So much as you can, that's a great step to build into your training is, okay, we're going to have some kind of mock type work that you're going to do, and we're going to make sure that you can do this properly before we put you in a situation where you could be exposed to a hazard. That brings us into our third part of the lesson here. We're talking about cross-cultural sensitivity. Sensitivity is not a word a lot of us like to hear. A lot of us don't like getting involved with feelings and emotions, but it's not so much what we're talking about here. We're just talking about understanding and empathizing and knowing that everybody comes from somewhere different. And for the most part here, the cultural factors involved sometimes are going to boost our ability to talk to people and to get compliance, or get them to follow the rules. But in order to do that, we have to be clear. We have to make sure that folks understand what we're trying to put out there. In safety, there's a lot of big words, so that's something to stay away from, even for us who are all English speaking. There's some words out there that'll stumble most of us up, and the others have to try to figure out what we're trying to say. So imagine that same issue coming up when English is not your first language. So that's part of including people and making them feel like the safety meeting is for them. There's things there that they need to understand. So when you do involve your informal leaders with your safety training, make sure things are not going over their head, and we're not trying to use big words just for the sake of being impressive. And then the next thing you know, we got folks who are lost. So our strategies here on the plain language side is just avoid things that you'd have to explain out. Find ways to just talk about what you're trying to say in longer terms, rather than jargon, which kind of like something like zero energy state. Now you're talking about lockout tagout. You're talking about a kind of a deeper term in there, and you want to tell people in lockout tagout, we're isolating, or we are removing power, or we are turning things off, and we're making sure everything is off, and there's no potential or no opportunity for anything to be turned back on while you're working. That beats zero energy state any day, even for me in English. So you have a worker who English is not their first language, they're going to get what you're talking about after a while. You say zero energy state once and move on, all right, that just went over their head, and now we don't have the opportunity to really even explain it out. And there's so much to be learned in just one of these little jargon-like statements. So hope that helps a bit. Um, it's more of whenever somebody has to translate, if you hear somebody say uh, maybe 100 words in another language, and then they'll look back to you with the translation and be like, they said they like it, and you're just like, wait, didn't they just talk for 2 3 minutes? um, in Spanish, I could tell you there's a word for everything. um, you never hear a word that can be used twice, like the word right. You go right, that's correct, that's a direction, that is a side of the body. In Spanish, there'd be a whole nother word for every one of those things. So there's there's that, and there's also understanding that sometimes we're not going to be able to get things down to the lowest common denominator to be able to explain it well, and we actually have to go into the person's preferred language or use those informal leaders to do some translation for us as much as possible. If you can get people to be proficient safety trainers, or to assist you in doing some of the on the job training, that's going to be a great way to go. If I wasn't a good safety guy, I'd have a hard time, speaking in the language of my compliance officers who work with me, who have all their own jargon and all their own terms. They'd be a lot less likely to listen to me if I didn't know all those terms. So yeah, be aware of those cultures that are out there. Um, folks are definitely going to agree with you, and not ask questions pretty much as a common staple. You're not going to have folks who come in unruly, or want to disrespect you as a manager. That's not really the culture that I came from. More so, they're going to not want to disagree, and they're going to ask very few questions, if any, because they want to show that they understand. And even if they don't, they want to hold on to that job. So they're not going to ask questions out of fear of getting terminated or disciplined in some kind of way. So just realize that in Latin culture, there's a lot of respect for authority. So you're with starting off on the right foot. You're not going to have to earn respect, but you are going to have to earn trust. So try to do as much as you can to get hands-on practice happening. If you can't do hands-on practice, do some demonstrations for people. Find ways to bring in some type of visual aids, or props and things like that to your training. Let people put their hands on harnesses, lockout, tag out devices, and make sure people understand what they're for, and that they feel comfortable with them, that they know it's theirs, that they know it's to be used, and for them not to have fear right off the bat of even asking for any of these things. Hopefully that helps. Moving on to empathy. On the empathy side of things, we're going to make sure that we're acknowledging people's feelings about stuff, basically knowing how hard their jobs are, and just giving them props for sticking with the work, and becoming more proficient as they go along. That always includes something about reporting. Okay, so if people can come to you and speak to you and let you know about hurdles that they have in their proficiency, or building competency, a lot of times is going to be embarrassing. But if you're practicing all of our other skills, this should come about pretty plain and simple here. So we want to know about near misses, and we want to know about hazards that people are concerned about, or it leads to an injury. If it's led to an injury, it's pretty much gone too far. If we're just chasing injuries all the time, it doesn't feel like a very rewarding position. So in that, we want to encourage people to report. We want to let them know that their opinion matters. That's where the empathy comes in. It's, hey, you're doing the work. We need to know what hazards you're facing, or what concerns you have. That's all part of being supportive. And when there's things that are brought to your attention, it shouldn't upset us. It shouldn't be something that we blame people for doing. if there's need for retraining, then we schedule that training, and we try to rebuild that competency best we can. So empathy is not so much about emotion, like we say here on the slide. It's about showing workers that their perspective does matter and that we empathize with them, because a lot of us probably did come up through the ranks and did this kind of work. So it's really easy to tell people, hey, I know it's long hours, I know it's tough work, I've worked hard this season, this many years, and you're doing a good job or something. That's what everybody wants to hear while they're out there. And you want to kind of validate their feelings about things, and not try to minimize it and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. Or if someone's actually bringing concerns to you, remember the cultural part. They're pretty much going on a limb to try to tell you, something that probably is deeply concerning them, not just what a rank and file worker, who's from your community, might want to tell you. They don't want to tell you a whole lot more. They might have complaints all the time. You're not really going to see that too much coming from the Latin culture. So whenever you do have hazards reported to you, thank the people for going on a limb, for helping protect their coworkers. The Latin community, there's a big focus on family. So sometimes you say, hey, thanks, that more people are going to go home safe because of you. Or we're going to be able to make sure this guy is able to continue working and supporting his family because you take actions like this and you're willing to go on a limb for your coworkers or for yourself. Bringing up safety matters are what I consider to be like signs of somebody who is confident, who does trust me, and who wants to make sure that their opinion is heard because it matters. So when folks have questions, it's like, hey, bring me more of these. I want to hear your question. There's definitely no judgment. There's no dumb question. A response that we need to have. So this brings us to our fifth and final part of the lesson here, where we talk about active listening to reduce hazards. We're basically listening to be able to understand, not just waiting till they're done talking to say something. I'm sure everybody's been in conversations like that where you're trying to tell a story about something that's concerning, and someone's trying to stop you every time you take a breath to give you an answer that makes you stop talking. So that's the opposite of what we want. We want to make sure that we're listening, we're gaining understanding, and that that requires some active steps that we have to take during these conversations about serious safety issues. Maintaining eye contact and attention is always important. However, staring at people who don't want to make a lot of eye contact, you got to kind of parcel that out a little bit. And every now and then, we're just looking off to the side and nodding and going into deep thought. If you're the type of person who wears glasses, I always just take an active step when people talk to me to actually take my glasses off and you know show that I'm listening. So that's just one active behavior. There's things to avoid, like backing away from people or putting your hands in your pockets when they start to talk to you, or crossing your arms. Those are all sort of things that we have to watch in ourselves and know that we're not bringing to the conversation. Start thinking about how you interact with your family members, and the posture that you take when your family members speak to you, and compare that to the posture you take when workers bring safety and health concerns to your attention. Requires a little bit of, what do I bring to the party, kind of thought here. So always helps when people are talking to me. I think for them to continue talking to me, for me to like nod while they're speaking. I'm being an active listener. I'm leaning in. I'm not stepping away. I'm not making sure, people always say, if you're happy, tell your face, because you don't look happy. So sometimes you actually have to put on a face for folks and say, okay, yeah, I do want to hear more. Yeah, tell me more about that. Even if you realize it's going to cost you all kinds of work later on, it's still something that you got to listen to, that you have to let folks kind of get out of their system. Sometimes it's something that you're like, that's really not an issue, but you're not going to stop them halfway through. You're going to make sure you hear the whole thing before you make that determination. And it just allows people to feel a whole lot more open with you, realize that you listen to them. When something important does come up, you're going to get to hear that. But yeah, being a safety and health agent out there definitely requires a lot of patience. And I could tell you that from, working phones at the area office and taking complaints for, weeks on end. It's a full-time job to, hear people out on their safety concerns. But the better you do your training, the more real those concerns will be that come to you. And the more you build trust with folks, the more they realize, the things that you act on, and they see what's important, and they see you committed to their safety and health program. And if they know that you take time to listen to them, now the safety program means something. So if there's any kind of hesitation, confusion, anything that they're telling you should have plenty of detail. If you need more detail, that's where you go to that bilingual person, and or that informal leader, and try to gain more understanding about what they're trying to tell you. If they seem confused, or if they still seem nervous, you may want to involve that person now to kind of help steady the ship, if you will. Okay, before we get into our scenarios, we have three scenarios we're going to talk about, and we're going to open it up to all of you to either type things in and give us some feedback, or open up mics and let you all speak. So we have a couple minutes here. If there's any questions on the material covered so far, you can take those now if you like, before we get into our scenarios. A lot. Can you help me out? Is there anything in the chat there that we can address?
Yes. So again, how can workers who speak virtually no English understand safety training? And with that, um, just somebody stated, I'm the closest thing to bilingual on site. I speak great Spanglish. Any thoughts on using translation apps?
Yeah, translation apps are great. But also consider, where your folks are coming from. There's some of those apps, want you to speak more professionally. And sometimes there's terms that are used in Spanish that are, also kind of like, college level terms. And um, folks you have who are, coming up, to the United States here to, do this type of work, sometimes are going to shy away from larger words, even in their language. So it is something to use. If I was using a translation app, I would definitely find somebody who is a little better with English, and is able to read through it and say, some of these are kind of bigger words, and you can make this a little more simplified. It's usually the feedback you're going to get from using a translation. And if you can use
Um,
your Spanglish and kind of see some of that in there, if you can't read the word in Spanish and you can read most words in Spanish, it's probably going to give a worker a little bit of a hard time as well.
right. Um, so there's been quite a bit of discussion on this topic in the chat. How frequently should safety meetings be held to achieve a high level of safety performance? And so I will say people have been going back and forth, maybe it's not about the meeting, but about well, things you've been talking about, the engagement in it, or toolbox talks. But again, I still think that's a good thing to address.
Yeah, I think being visible on a regular basis, whether it's every Tuesday we do a walkthrough, or every time we do something non-routine, we're going to do a tailgate talk, or we're going to have something like that, maybe once a month. All those things are, anything that you can do that's predictable, and you exhibit all these behaviors during those, is going to be a positive step. But daily meetings for safety, sometimes can get a little bit, kind of like white noise. You definitely want to make sure you have something useful to talk about when you're doing meetings. Don't just do meetings for the sake of doing a meeting. That's best advice.
Right. And Adam put a comment in there that really ties into everything you've been talking, how the message is delivered in the atmosphere in the room is definitely important. If a safety meeting or a hazard has been identified and it becomes more of a crackdown versus a learning, then I don't think, as you've been talking about, you're not really getting the team involved in understanding and doing it right. Um,
Right. Yeah, everything
I'm gonna
becomes
have one more
disciplinary.
question here now before you go into scenarios. And you again were talking a little bit about it, education levels. The person said, I have very intelligent reports who are not well educated. I love techniques for teaching someone who doesn't appreciate written word or numbers. Do you have some tips for that?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a lot more like low language type handouts and things like that you can get your hands on. Um, Busha does have plenty of those where we call them quick takes. A lot of them do have a lot of diagrams on them. I think that's probably the best way to deal with that because if they're intelligent, they're going to be able to pick up a lot more from looking at something that's intended for that purpose and not so much to be read. And then from there, you can start to see if they have questions about these issues or they want to dive deeper with you, based on what you're showing them. So as much as you can do it, take photos in their work areas. Make your safety training based on what they're actually doing out there, rather than getting material that's generic. Even if it shows a grain bin, if it's not the grain bin you're entering, you're not going to bring up the issues that you might have with yours, or it's not going to remind you of it. So definitely, bring the workplace into the training, or bring the training into the workplace, one or the other. So and involve them, get them to be the ones who are helping you put together these slideshows or your handouts. Involve people early if it's something that you feel like they can contribute to. But it's really hard when people are not able to read or do some of those basics. But it always comes back down to practicing and getting people's hands on stuff and talking them through their training, rather than expecting them to sit and read and listen. I would definitely take them away from those types of habits, or take yourself away from those types of habits if that's what's going on. But if you're experiencing difficulties and you're already doing hands-on stuff, and you're already doing all these things I'm talking about, as far as bringing photographs in or examples in from the workplace, that's tough. I mean, these are the best ways that I've found to do training. This is how we train our folks. I get safety people from all walks of life. It's not like industrial hygienists that go to college for it. We get folks from the military, we get folks from private industry, we get folks from the trades, and we have to teach them the OSHA way every time. So there's a lot of, okay, let's sit and practice this, and show me that you understand. That's way more effective for us than reading slides to them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Somebody said nothing loses an employee. Adam, thank you. Loses an employee's attention faster than boring, unapplicable trainings. And that's right. Another comment we had up front is, again, we used to, hey, here's a piece of paper, or here's the same video that was, made in 1960, and we don't make them relevant anymore. So, I think if you would like to go ahead and go on with the scenarios, so everybody in attendance, um, Carlos is putting up scenarios. I'm going to talk about them, and be active in the chat, in what we're going through here.
Okay. Yeah, we only have about 10 minutes left, so we'll definitely go through scenario one here. In this scenario, we're looking at a near miss in a grain bin. We have a newer worker from an underserved background, let's just say Latino. is nearly struck by falling material while walking on some crusted grain during a grain bin entry, and no injury occurred. But they do tell one of their coworkers privately that they don't want to get anybody in trouble, and they're not going to really talk about the incident. You catch wind of it somehow, and you want to be able to get them from being so fearful, and we want to practice some rapport building. So anybody in the audience, if you'd like to chime in or raise your hand, so I'll take care of you and unmute you. But if you'd like to raise your hand and say, something that you would ask this worker, use an open-ended question that shows some empathy toward the situation here. Just a practice in rapport building. Do we have any volunteers, Salah? Or if anybody would like to type something in the chat, that'll also work.
Not yet, but I did allow them to unmute themselves directly.
Okay, cool. Well, think about it, and if you'd like to unmute yourself and give us a question that you would ask this worker, no judgment, the safe space.
Jordan put in the chat, ask them how come they were walking on crusted grain. Very good point. Probably goes back to somebody, they were hired and everybody said we were very busy and didn't have time to train. And that's unfortunately what happens sometimes. That's not good for us in the industry to do that.
Yes, why were we walking on crusted grain in the first place, right? So what's a good empathetic way to ask that question? I think it's a great question to ask. Now let's again, kind of get it down to some common denominators where judgment is out of the picture, and we really just want to know, what got them to that point. Would anybody else like to give it a stab?
Can you see the chat right now, Carlos?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Nicole. I would start out with an apology and come in humble and just say, I'm really sorry. I heard that you had a little bit of an adventure in the grain bin entry today when you were walking on some grain. Would you be willing to tell me what happened?
Yeah, I think that's great. Just basically letting people know, hey, it's not always your decision. Let's kind of unravel this, and if it was your decision, we're going to hear that, right? So yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I would definitely go with that.
I know there's some good talk there about approaching them with the thought in mind that something had happened, but another thing I think that'd be good to do is approaching them and try to get a maybe ask them how the task went, or if there's any issues with the task that might get them to open up themselves versus I don't want to say like kind of diminishing their trust with whoever they talk to, and then all of a sudden they know that so it kind of, I think it builds some better rapport with the person themselves. You're able to approach them and say, hey, did you have any issues with this? Was there any problems that had happened? Or you can kind of open them up to giving you the information themselves versus them thinking you got it from somewhere else or something like that. Just a little bit more direct.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Cody, that's the next way to go about it. You're getting some thumbs up there as well. So I would definitely say, validating the fact that somebody's newer and, kind of basing a lot on that and saying, hey, I know you're new, or, walk me through this, and, how did this end up happening? Anything you can do that's, put some thought into, how you're bringing up the topic, it is usually going to result pretty well for you. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just, hey, we're putting a little more thought into how we're handling this issue than, what I would normally do off the cuff. But thanks, Cody.
I think Melissa had a very good point for whether it's supervisors to think about with fear of retaliation. She said she sometimes wonders about how it was handled at a previous job. Sometimes you can learn about why they fear reporting. And I think that's a very good point, because we've all probably worked at different companies at different jobs, and some of that fear may be, I don't know. I think they're tricking me when they say it's okay to report. So thank you,
Mhm.
Melissa, for that comment.
Yes, thank you. And Aaron, I like your question also. How did this, unfortunately we didn't have anyone get hurt, but could you help me understand what happened? And that's gonna basically prompt some thought. Anything you can do that asks people to think, to help you out, is just shows that level of respect that you're willing to alter your thought process, with respect to their concern. And that's going to help you build all these things, trust, rapport, and helps you with your questioning style in general. Just to always be reconsidering how you're making somebody either pull away or get more engaged with what you're trying to do on the safety side. So yeah, always consider those. I think we have time for one more here, so we'll do this next scenario. Yeah, never pointing fingers. Seeing the stuff rolling in. Well, let's do scenario 2 here. Supervisor rushes through lockout tagout steps, and a worker is unsure if energy isolation actually got completed, but is reluctant to ask the question to authorities. So basically, you're showing someone lockout steps. You went pretty quick, or you saw the supervisor go pretty quick through them, and you're there as the safety rep. You see the person kind of reluctant, kind of looking around, like, oh, gee, am I gonna be able to go in here? They have the kind of look on their face, like, I really don't know. I watch body language a lot. Body language will tell you way more than verbals. So, you're seeing this person looking reluctant to go in, or, just not sure that they could follow those steps the same way. Practice some kind of questioning that's more or less assertive, but at the same time, show some empathy. So let's pretend we're the supervisor. We rush through. We're the safety person standing there with them. How would you respond to this hesitation that you're seeing, or somebody who's just like, you just see that they don't get it, but they're not asking any questions.
Has anybody experienced this before? Themselves when they were new in the industry, a rushed training in a pretty severe situation. Go ahead, Melissa.
So I did see this pretty recently, and I have a plan to go through and kind of retrain that trainer, because I'm a little bit unsure about whether or not the training was done well, or even if they understand the importance of doing the training well. So that is kind of the plan. Is I understand that the supervisors and all of that are super rushed, and we have a lot going on. So I'm going to go through with that supervisor later and be like, hey, I think we could do this a little better next time.
That's great. Yeah, take the onus off of the person who wants to do it right, and go to the person who could do a better job. Yeah, that's a great idea. I also see one here where it's tell everybody if they have questions, just let me know. I'm the safety guy. I'll talk to the supervisor. I'll deal with the issue. That's a great way to deal with it as well. But continue to let people know you're on their side. And Chris, go into the verification part, and hey, this should give you warm fuzzies, and this is how we're going to verify that all these things are locked out. Everything you saw, just go quickly. We're going to go back through it slowly. That's a great way to do it. I like that. And yeah, the only way I could get convinced is if the supervisor tells and shows me what he did and how that protects me. Yeah, absolutely, Luz. That's something that you can easily remedy, and you can say, hey, this needs to be something that you go through slowly, that you do again. Show me how that protects, or show that person how that protects them. Talk them through it a little more. I think that's very helpful.
I see Jordan just mentioned about the same time I was. that stop work authority, that at our facility, that's something we always try to push, is everybody has that stop work authority. There's, it's not supervisor, it's not worker, it's not safety, it's anybody. We're all there together. And I know Carlos, going off your point about watching like body language or something like that, you see someone's uncomfortable or not, don't have the the courage or whatever to stop the work, then it's a good opportunity to do it yourself and get the conversation started. That might be a good push for them to be able to join in the conversation and then be able to give their thoughts, their concerns, if you're saying that they're struggling with being able to do it themselves.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I also see Nicole's comment here where it says, if you doubt your safety, that's stop criteria. We're going to walk back through it for you, and if you're in doubt, we're going to take care of that issue and make sure it's understood. Yeah, I think everybody's answering on the right side of the coin here. So I don't think my time here was poorly spent. I enjoyed going through this with you all. It's not a capacity building type of topic, but it's more of a food for thought, and hopefully it just helps you when you go back to your workplaces to just consider a couple new things, and hopefully it lets you break through with some people, and you're getting more reporting, and you're getting more feel for who this workforce is, and what are the things they're going to easily bring to you, and what are the things that you're going to have to struggle still to look for. But if you are struggling to look for things like near misses and stuff, I think these steps are really going to help people start bringing issues to your attention. So I thank you all for giving me the time to be here, and special thanks to Catherine, to Barb, and to Salah for attending you all and making this easy for me to do. So thank you all so much, and have a great day. Have a great safety career out there, and hopefully one day we'll see you again.
Yes, thank you so much again, everybody. Give a thank you and a round of applause to Carlos. Wonderful information, because again, safety shouldn't be about a command. And even though, yes, there are regulations around it, it should be about, hey, I want to protect myself. I want to protect the people I'm working with. So I love this information, because it's about being able to, get to the people where they are, where their mind is, what's most comfortable for them. And I appreciate that very much. If you would go ahead and stop your share. And then again, as people may see, we'll leave the chat up for a few more minutes. Catherine has posted in the chat a downloadable certificate for today. And again, if you go to the standupforgrainsafety.org, you can show your participation in the event with an overall stand-up certificate. And the sessions have all been recorded, and they've been getting posted to Stand Up Week recordings about 24 hours or so after, by the time they're downloaded and then re-uploaded again. So they are out there for you to pop in and view again. If you have members on your team that weren't able to come on with you, again, feel free. Everything out on the Stand Up for Grain Safety website has been graciously put out there by our sponsors and our teams. So thank you. Have a fantastic Friday and just a wonderful weekend, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot again, Barb.
Thanks,
Take it easy.
everybody.
Have
I'm
a great
gonna
weekend.